Okay, so you're very welcome in person and online today, and I'm really delighted. So my name is Susan Smith, I'm a GP, and I'm Professor of General Practice and Chair of the APCC. And we're really delighted that we have our very, very esteemed colleague. I actually had to write down all of your achievements because I couldn't memorize them. Professor Roseanne Kenny, who's going to speak to us today about age proofing. Roseanne is a specialist in medicine for the elderly. She is probably very well known to everybody here already. One of her most interesting recent appointments is as Regius Professor of Medicine or Physic in Trinity, which was a chair that was established in 1637. And she's the first woman to hold that position. So it's really impressive. She's also been the chair of medical gerontology. She's the founding principal investigator for the TILDA longitudinal study in Ireland. She's the director of the MISA Institute in St. James's. And then she has this recent book that is already been translated into other languages, and she's touring the world with it. So we're very lucky to have her here today. So thank you very much.
So thank you, everyone. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, great. Thank you. And I presume you can hear online now. Is that right, Lena? We're good. Okay, great. So thank you very much for inviting me when Susan said I was touring the world. How is the world today, anyway? And I'm delighted to be here. And thank you for coming in such great numbers and online in such great numbers. I'm going to give you a very positive message about aging. Life gets better after 50. This is factually correct from TILDA. And it continues to improve until about 70, late 70s, 78. And the thing that impacts on our quality of life at that stage is having a physical illness or a brain health illness. So everything I'm going to say today is about how to stave off the onset of physical or cognitive incapacity and compress the period of time towards the end of life that we spend with any morbidity. So that's the positive message. And the other positive message, which I'll share to you, is it's up to you. We've got control over 80% of that. It's not genes. Genes are about 20%. After the age of 80, they're about 30% of the contribution to healthy, longer life. The rest is up to ourselves. And the other important message, and you can fall asleep after this is the third big message, is it's never too late. There used to be a song, It's Never Too Late to Start Living. I don't know if anybody knows it. The 200-year-old alcoholic who fathered a child. But it is actually never too late. So the younger you start, the better. No question about that in terms of modifying our healthy life behaviors. But actually at any stage, we've shown you can change biological aging. So it's never too late. Okay. Okay. Now, the thirst for eternal youth. Is this being recorded to be shown subsequently? Yes. Okay. I won't be controversial then. The thirst for eternal youth. For many centuries, we've longed for an elixir of youth. And today, of course, there are many billionaires investing in this very area. Two things I disagree with. They call aging a disease. It is not a disease for which they are looking for a cure, for which, of course, they will make billions. But it's not a curable disease. It isn't in that category. It's a natural process that we will all go through. There's only one alternative. So I hope nobody in the room experiences that too soon. The Chinese, at the time of their probably most sophisticated culture, between 618 and 907 AD, were obsessed with eternal youth and had their alchemists prepare concoctions which would ensure that they lived longer. Mercury, cinnabar, gold, sulfur, incredibly poisonous. And it took them, despite the fact that they were such a sophisticated society, 300 years to cop on to the fact that they were losing emperors and noblemen by the score because they were imbibing in these eternal youth concoctions. So we have to be very, very careful when we're introducing compounds that might influence the aging process, that they are really carefully scrutinized. And I'll come on to that later on. We are experiencing a revolution in how long people are living older. Up until recently, maybe 200 years ago, 3 to 4% of human history, as far as we know, lived to 65 and over, 4% say. And we know this from writings and from people who were involved in writing. Socrates, of course, was forced by the governing bodies at the time to take self-poisoning at age 71 because they didn't like his philosophical approach. But his best mates lived to 80, 79, and 75. Now, in Germany, 22% of the population, over 1 in 5, are over 65. In Japan, they've surpassed 1 in 4. And in England, it's 19%. We're about 16%, but we're the fastest aging country in EU 27. So this is important for us. And this just shows you how fast we have changed at a population level in the context of aging. Here, in the 1800s, these are in countries that kept accurate records. In the 1800s, average life expectancy was about 40. 200 years later, we're way up here to 85. Like, that is an incredible increase over the last 200 years in expectancy. It's tailed off a bit, and the research field for aging now believes, we won't live forever, never reach that. Certainly the first people have been probably born who will live to 150. But we know that life span, the maximum lifespan, how long we as humans could live, is 122 years and 6 months, roughly. And that was a French lady in the south of France who lived that long, who was human. So lifespan is how long, that's how long we can live. But life expectancy is in mid-80s at the moment. That graph I showed you, what it means is this: a baby girl born to a family last year, this year, will live 3 months longer than her sister born last year. That's what that means. It's an increase since the 1800s of 3 months per year. Almost 2.5 years every 10 years. And the biggest increase in Ireland, proportionately, is going to be in people over 80 and 85, and in those over 100. When I was a young junior doctor, if there was a 100-year-old up in the ward, we'd all go up to have a look. It was such a rare occurrence. But of course now it's commonplace, and we all know 99-year-olds and 100-year-olds. There may be some in the audience that I don't know about. Why are we living longer? We have better healthcare, immunization, antibiotics, constant advances, particularly in technologies, early diagnostics, better water. Water quality was one of the biggest drivers for increased lifespan. Food, hygiene, better housing, lifestyle, and more prosperity. They're the reasons it's attributed to. But it's not only those reasons, because when we look at data, there seems to be something else going on that we haven't as yet explained. So the TILDA study was something, it's been going now for 17 years, 4 years of pilot data, and then we went into the field with the first data sweep in 2009. And what that's about, it's a longitudinal study, so we see the same participants every 2 years, and hats off to these amazing participants who contribute so much of their time. Every 4 years, when we have a detailed health assessment, they spend about 5.5 hours giving us information and doing tests. It's fantastic. And then alternate years, there's a surveyor goes to their house, it does about 1.5 hour survey in the house, and they complete a self-completion questionnaire. So a huge investment by our participants in the research infrastructure in Ireland, and we owe them so much. TILDA has been cited in almost 200 policy documents now. It is the go-to source if government are trying to get evidence and information for policy with respect to people over the age of 50. And of the new Sláinte Care indices, the things that have to be covered in Sláinte care in terms of collecting information. Tilda provides 70% of that information for adults. So it's a really important data source. And we collect everything. It's an omnibus study because all of you know, no one thing has influenced your process of getting older. But your childhood was like, is one of the biggest influences actually of how you age and your health in aging. Your transition through retirement, your economic status, the whole family structure, your relationships, how well you get on with your family members and friends, etc. Education, marital relationships, genes, of course, nutritional intake, of course, exercise, of course, mental health, very, very important. So no one thing determines how we age. All of those different factors come together to influence the aging process. What's lovely is we are looking at those factors like your quality of your friendships or much money you've got in the bank, not literally, but close, etc. And then we're actually able to use all of that information and drill right down to what your cells look like. We measure your biological aging, your aging clocks. So it's a fantastic way to actually interpret how the different life experiences you've had shape your cell function now. And once we understand that a little better, we'll know how to slow down the aging process in cells so that we compress diseases that are illnesses people get towards the end of life and enable a longer healthy life with independence and less disability. That's the objective. It influences policy, of course, very much so. Novel research, and we're currently developing a Tilda clock. So it's a Tilda measure of biological aging that we hope will help other research groups to actually measure what's going on in cells. And we've designed it so we're comparable with 26 studies worldwide. So we can say, okay, this is what the data from Tilda looks like. And in England, it looks like this. In Scotland, it looks like this. In Europe, it looks like this. In China, it looks like this. In India, they all have similar studies with the same core data being collected for comparability. And you should be very proud. In June, we're launching the first WHO Centre in Trinity, but the WHO Centre for Longitudinal Studies in Aging. The WHO have awarded Tilda and that whole research framework WHO status, which is huge. So it gives us a global, really global branding for the work that Tilda has been doing. And it will help us to help other countries who are starting these sorts of studies, particularly African subcontinent and South American countries, etc., to help us to help them to collect data like this, because aging is happening very quickly, very often in lower and middle income countries, and they have no information and therefore no infrastructure to support people as they get older. And very often in countries, for example, where there was a lot of HIV, the parenting is being done by grandparents because that middle cohort has died. So it's very, very important that we recognize the contribution that people make to society globally as they get older, but also help them to support people as they get older with infrastructure and information. So we age at different rates. And, sometimes it's very frustrating when people are developing policies and it's a one size fits all. And you think, well, why should it be a one size fits all? We're not all the same. When we're born, we pretty much look the same, and there's a lot of similarity, a lot more similarity than when life takes its narrative with us. But as we get older, we vary hugely. You know that. It seems self-evident. But I come back again to policy and perspectives. Older people are not a group of the same here that we do this with. We are all so different, and we must recognize that fact. Look at this. All of these men were around the age of 60 when these photographs were taken. Now, in contrast to the babies and the incubators who all looked pretty much the same, these clearly do not. Some have had good, clearly access to surgery. Others haven't bothered, or if they did, it wasn't sufficient. But look how different they all look for six men who are the same age. And I'm going to show you that that's what we call heterogeneity. Like that difference actually pervades everything, right down to our cells, right down to our immune responses, etc. So first of all, why do we age? Are there genes that can extend life? And can we augment our activities in order to live longer? Well, as I said earlier on, genes are only responsible for about 20% of the lifespan. A little bit more as we get older. Maybe if you've hit 80 and you've had sisters or brothers who've lived into their 90s, maybe then that will contribute to 30% of your lifespan after that. But generally speaking, we are pretty much in control of how long we're going to live and how healthy we're going to live. We know that from identical twin studies. So their genes were exactly the same. Their genes were exactly the same, but they took a different course in life. And they aged differently biologically, even though they're identical twins, same genes, same chronological age, same number of candles on the birthday cake. They were very different. And that's how we know that genes have only contributed that much to their aging process. And we know a lot from these amazing long-lived animals, and you can imagine that there's quite a lot of activity in this space in trying to understand why these animals, the Antarctic sponge, in a mobile creature, very slow growth rate. And as I said in the book, we cruelly called someone in our office the Antarctic sponge. The oldest known is 1,550 years old. Imagine a living thing that's that old. Isn't that remarkable? So you can imagine, we share an awful lot in terms of genes with these creatures and cellular activity, what makes for energy in a cell. So of course, there's a lot of exercise in trying to understand what it is about this creature which has contributed to its longevity. And then how does that equate to us? This is the longest lived mammal, the bowhead whale, 211 years. On average, though, bowhead whales live to 200. And this is fascinating. So next time you're in the sea and passed by a jellyfish, be respectful, because it probably has eternal youth. It's one of the few creatures who morphs, who changes, moves from a polyp, that's like a baby jellyfish, to an adult, and then has the capacity to go back to a polyp again, and doesn't appear to have a natural limit to lifespan. So that is also fascinating. So many of them are resistant to a thing called oxidative stress. Now, you don't need to know the science behind this. I mean, you can if you want to, but you've all heard of antioxidants, you know, supplements, you hear of antioxidants. And the reason antioxidants are good is because they help your resistance to oxidative stress in the cell. Stress is not good for cells, any sort of stress. And oxidative stress is one of those kind of stress components. Now, I do want to show you that there is work nonetheless on genes in cells. And this is a lovely example. C. elegans is the fancy word for a very tiny worm. It's the size of a comma on an A4 sheet. I put a little comma there. So on the screen, that's the size of this worm that I'm going to talk about. But actually, it's tiny if you think the size of a comma mark on an A4 sheet. And scientists way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, showed that if you modify this gene, you mutate it slightly, just by changing ambient temperature that the worm is living in. That means like, is it very cold or very hot? Changing the temperature the worm is living in by about 20 degrees, you can mutate this DA2 gene. And remarkably have shown that mutation of that gene actually influences the lifespan of the worm. So this is a healthy worm. They only live 14 days. That's the other really handy thing about studying them, because you can quickly look at lifespan. Studies looking at lifespan in humans take, obviously, decades, because lifespan means the end outcome is death. And that can take a long time to follow through. But this just shows you a young, healthy worm, say 24 hours old, heavy, mobile, flexible, etc. This is the same worm 14 days later, frail. It's being poked by the scientists to get it to move at all. So that's its lifespan, is 14 days. That worm is near to death. But look at the worms in whom the temperature they were growing in, their ambient temperature was modified. Same age, 14-day-old worms. So that's where we'd like to be without modifying our genes. But it just shows that there is capacity with gene modification, and there's quite a lot of work, obviously, in this area. Identifying cohorts, long-lived cohorts who have genes that we know influence the aging process, and then are there safe ways that we can modify genes? And so far in humans, they have not been identified. So these 6 men look differently because they've been exposed to different external stressors, what we call environmental factors. And they're the ones that contribute to the other 80% of the aging process. And we can actually measure the biological aging. Now, I said chronological age was the number of candles on our birthday cake, or the age you put on your driving license, right? That's a number. That's a number. The biological age is actually measuring some of the things that those modified worms were experiencing in their cells when we changed environmental factors. And we call one of the ways of looking at those age-related cellular changes epigenetic clocks. They're not genes as such, but they're a component of genes. And there are lots of these clocks now, including one we're developing ourselves under my colleague stewardship, Colin McCrory. So these measure biological aging, a much more accurate measure of your aging. And there are different clocks now for not just your general aging, but actually the aging of your skin, the aging of muscles, the aging of bone, the aging of our heart, the aging of our kidneys. So this is the way our science is going, but it's also the way our treatments are going to go, because we're going to be more and more personalizing treatment. And when I talked earlier on about heterogeneity and how we're so different, yeah, we're all given the same drugs first. You've got a high cholesterol, you take this first. But if we could understand the individual differences of everybody in this room and identify the best targeted treatment for that person, it would be so much more meaningful, probably. So that's why we're trying to understand biological aging in more detail and aging of different organs, so that ultimately we can personalize individual treatments. Now, I don't mind if you open the doors, actually, because it is getting awfully hot in here, and that makes people cough if you have a propensity to coughing or whatever. It does do that. I know. Yeah, open the doors and just put a bit more air in the room. Yeah. So I said to you earlier on, the earlier you start, the better, but it's never too late. I want to show you a great example of that. There's a study very similar to Tilda called the Dunedin study in New Zealand. The difference is they followed people at regular intervals, the same people from birth, and they're now in their 50s. When they were 38, the Dunedin researchers measured their 1,000 participants' epigenetic clocks, their biological aging. And they were expecting their 38, they'll all be around the same, close enough to the chronological age. Watch the spread. So everybody's 38. Down here on this axis is your biological age. And here are your percentages. Look at the spread. So this is the number of candles on the birthday cake here. But this is how much their clocks in the cells, their biological aging, their pace of aging had varied. Some of the 38-year-olds were behaving almost like 50-year-olds. Isn't that remarkable? And some of them were behaving in their 26 to 28-year-old, the 38-year-old. So this was a wake-up call to our community at the time. And they were able to go back because they followed these young adults through from birth and clearly identify that the things, the factors, the life experiences which made the difference in their biological aging at 38 were poverty and education in childhood, health behaviors, starting to smoke early, drinking early, etc., or adverse childhood experiences. If there was alcoholism in a family, divorce in a family, depression in a family, those were the main factors which influenced the pace of aging in these 30-year-olds, 38-year-olds. Not only that, but the fast agers, when they repeated this 2 and 4 years later, remained fast. They were continuing to age quickly. They're hard things to modify, but we are very engaged with trying to inform policymakers, educators, society, that aging doesn't start at 50, 60, 70, 80. It begins early on in life. And that as a society, as a community, therefore, we should be really focused on ensuring that we modify some of these components, get rid of poverty, ensure everybody gets a good education, ensure the children who are exposed to adverse childhood events actually have some sort of a support structure, some one person, because that's been shown to really work well, some one dependent that they can go to if they have issues. If we do that and encourage good life behaviors, exercise, diet, etc., early, we will give those children now a chance later on in life to be healthy adults and not get diseases 20 years before those of us who have had a good childhood. So it's important to understand that life course, the long trajectory. With respect to health behaviors, I just want to say at this juncture, because I don't think I'm saying it any other time, at the moment, ultra-processed foods hold the market. We don't have accurate data in Ireland yet, but in the UK, in England, the diet of over 50-year-olds, 50% of the diet is ultra-processed foods. They're foods where you look at the pack of whatever you're about to eat and you don't have the constituents, even one of them, in your kitchen. That's ultra-processed. That's a quick way of knowing is it ultra-processed or not. And they're hugely modified. New instruction. Our gut hasn't been evolved to be exposed to this, and suddenly we're exposing it to them. The sad news is that of 10-year-olds in England, 91% of their diet is ultra-processed food. So, and of course, there's a huge corporate interest in continuing this. I mean, it's a brand. So, nobody's going to make a fortune out of an apple. But an apple drink that has additives which sweeten it or other components, etc., that are ultra processed, the company will make money out of that. So this requires a huge attitudinal change to turn this around. But we've got to turn it around because this is one of the contributors to our diabetes problem and to our obesity problem, and that lovely clean graph that I showed you of lifespan is starting to peter out now, and one of the contributors to that is body mass index, overweight, diet, and diabetes. So, very simple tutorial on the cells and what's important in cells and how the environment influences. All we are is an energy producer. And every single one of our cells produces energy. So the liver cells produce enough of energy to keep the liver going, the heart cells, energy to keep the heart going, etc. We take food in, that food is digested, that's why the ultra-processed foods are so counterintuitive, goes into our cells eventually from the bloodstream, and every single cell uses a modification of that food that we took in to produce energy and give vitality to the cell, and therefore the vitality to the organ that the cell is part of, and therefore us, the living person. That's all that's about. But like I'm not going to go into this because it's too complicated. This is about RNA. These are about the clocks and how we measure them. any energy production, if you have oil production, electricity production, there's byproduct from the energy production. That's a rule of thumb. And the same for our cells. So when our cells are producing this really valuable energy, there are toxic byproducts that the cell wants to get rid of quickly. And it's when that energy production and getting rid of the energy is in imbalance, that's when little things start to happen in the cells, what we call hallmarks of aging, that we can identify when we look at the cells. That's when they start to creep in. And one of the biggest consequences of that imbalance between energy production and the lorries getting rid of the byproduct of the energy as fast as possible from the cell is inflammation in the cell. Now, inflammation is a good thing. We know that during COVID. When we got an infection, when we got COVID, it was great that we had a good, appropriate inflammatory response to get rid of the virus and the consequences of the virus. But inflammation that's chronically there as the cells are producing energy is not good, because we can only cope with so much of that inflammation. And that triggers a number of other pathways in the cell, which we can read as biological aging. So it's important that we keep inflammation down. And the bottom line with respect to inflammation, it's not just stress in the cell, but stress, mental stress, also accelerates inflammation. So that's why it's so important that we have de-stressing rituals or ways of chilling and relaxing to help reduce inflammation. But I'll show you other ways of reducing that inflammation. Now, these are the topical ways of measuring what's going on in the cell at the moment, and we're doing all of these in tilde: metabolomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, epigenetics, telomere length. You don't need to know that, but just know that they're out there. And you'll hear, oh, this is the best way of measuring it. This is the best way of measuring it. Actually, telomere length correlates with aging not very well. You want the line to go like this. This is the only bit of statistics that Cathal can argue with. These are statisticians. Epigenetics performs very well, okay, correlates nicely with aging. These were all designed, this particular one initially, for mortality. The others, not too bad. But what's intriguing is, oh, I don't have that slide in there, right, okay. What's intriguing is if you correlate these with each other, the correlations are terrible, like 0.04. Okay, so they're all telling us different things about what's going on in the cell. They're all hallmarks of aging in the cell, but it's much more complex than there's one answer and one thing, and then everything else is a consequence of that one thing. It's not so simple. So how are we, what can you do? What can you do leaving this room today and think, oh God, that's great. Okay, I'm going to change that this month, that next month, and that the month after. And these are some of the things that we've got control over that affect inflammation in the cell. Stress, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Creativity. Creativity is a very positive anti-inflammatory. Having a purpose in your life, believe it or not. Weight and exercise. And we've learned a lot from areas called the blue zones. Now, what they are, you might have seen there's a Netflix series on this. Dan Butler, who's a journalist, traveled to these blue zones and made observational studies with respect to them. And I was furious because I published the book at the time and I thought, oh, what a great idea. I'd love to have done a Netflix series. going to visit these places, and not as a journalist, but as a scientist or clinician, to look at the behaviors and see, what do I notice with respect to these places where more people live beyond 100 than on mainland or nearby. That's the first thing. Proportionately, more people living beyond 100. But the other thing is they live beyond 100 with little or no diseases that we associate with aging, like dementia, like arthritis, like high blood pressure, heart disease, etc. So they live well and healthily beyond 100. So what's the secret of the blue zones? And we've gleaned a lot of information by looking in depth at the blue zones. What are their behaviors that we can use to inform our behaviors. So they not only live longer, but a larger proportion live to 100, remain well active into their 90s, and less chronic diseases. Okay, so that's what makes them so interesting. And look, there are 5 of them. And look how far apart they are. Okinawa, Japan, Icaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in California. What you'll notice is they're all by the sea. That's the first thing. And the secondly, they're pretty much all on a height, okay? You can't see that from this. You take my word for that. And thirdly, I wanted to share with you why they're called blue zone. Not because they're by the sea, but because the demographer who first identified what I've shared with you there about their unique characteristics was using a big blue marker at the time. He just marked Okinawa, Sardinia, Icaria, and they became known as the blue zones thereafter. Very romantic story. So what has been noted by the many scientists who have now studied the blue zones is the following. First of all, they move naturally throughout the day. There's no like, okay, this morning I'm going to go to the gym for 45 minutes and then I'm going to sit down for the rest of the day because that's what the day looks like. Movement is a natural part of their day. Walking, gardening, housework. I remember seeing an amazing video of a woman in her late 90s that one of the original demographers showed. And she was chopping wood. Age, if I can't say, I'm going to say 96, I can't remember exactly, but over 90. And she was chopping wood for that day, something she had done every morning of her adult life. And just the physical activity of chopping wood, it was remarkable. So that sort of activity is built into the day. What can we do about that? I was speaking in Florence last week, and the airport at Gatwick that I was in, the terminal I was in, and the airport at Florence had no stairs, all escalators. Normally I say, if you're in an airport or you're in a supermarket, you're in a shop or whatever, use the stairs. Don't try not to use the escalator. That's a way we can build in exercise normally, naturally into our day. Walk to the shops if you can. You know, don't hop into the car. I'm as guilty as any of this, but don't hop into the car. Make yourself have an extra 15 or 20 minutes and walk it and walk back. But the escalators now, so it's more difficult to walk up an escalator. Anyway, the other, so moving naturally through the day is very important. The other important observation is relaxation. And gardening is a really interesting way of relaxing. There have been lots of studies showing that people almost go into a trance sometimes when gardening. And if there's anybody in the room that would like to come and do my garden after, I promise you a trance. A shock first and then a trance. But so gardening is good for us. And it's interesting that a mycobacterium, a certain bacteria, has been found in soil, which has serotonin properties. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that is influenced by antidepressants, for example. So this mycobacterium acts on the same brain chemicals as the drugs we take for mood, which is an interesting observation. But anyway, gardening is relaxing and de-stressing. And there was a nice experiment which looked at just quietly reading and gardening and compared the two, took bloods for stress markers and measured things like heart rate, blood pressure, and other what we call autonomic nervous system factors. The autonomic nervous system is our fight or flight one that gets a little bit high and agitated when we're in low mood or nervous about something or stressed. So measured all of those markers, did it before gardening and after gardening, did it before reading and after reading, and then crossed the groups over. Both of those activities were associated with relaxation, but significantly more so gardening. And of course, gardening, we're outside, we're in natural life. And I'll come on to that in a moment, but that's so important for us as humans because we've evolved being exposed to natural light. So gardening is good if you can get to do a bit of gardening. Even looking at images of gardens and trees, etc., sort of forest bathing virtually, it's been shown to reduce people's flight or fight responses in the sympathetic nervous system. So think green. And again, similar experiments have been done on a treadmill indoors and walking outdoors. And again, unsurprisingly, the impact on stress and stress biomarkers is better if we're doing the activity outdoors than indoors. I remember doing a podcast with Micheál O'Hare during COVID, and he said something to me that really struck me, and then I subsequently found it's absolutely factually correct. He said he gets up every morning and he takes the air. So he goes outside and spends 5 minutes just looking at the sky and just relaxing in natural light first thing in the morning. And actually, there's now a great body of research showing that that's really important to alert our whole nervous system via the eye and natural light, and get our circadian rhythms, our natural rhythms over a 24-hour period into sync. And we have those circadian rhythms in every single cell in the body. So that contributes positively to what I was talking about earlier on, this aging process and inflammation. The other thing the Blue Zones have is a great community. Now, what we're doing today with Cosan and even those online, it's a great community initiative. So you've got people doing it together, you're meeting together, you're sharing new knowledge, which is new learning, also very important as an anti-inflammatory, believe it or not. And that was found to be a commonality in the communities, this sharing of a time in the day. Loma Linda Pray. Some studies have shown that being part of a faith-based community, the Loma Linda or Adventists, can add anything from 4 to 14 years to life expectancy. So it has a significant impact. Close friendships then is a sort of extenuation of that, extension of that. And strong social networks, terribly important. And, you know, if I was asked, what's the most important thing that you can do for healthy aging? I would say regular meeting up with friends and having a good laugh. Children laugh 400 times a day, but as we get older, it's much less frequent, much less frequent. And when I was writing the chapter on this in the book, it was 6 o'clock in the evening. I was in the hospital, and it was during COVID. And it just dawned on me, God, I don't remember laughing today. And I'm naturally a laugher. I don't remember laughing today. So sometimes we have to make a conscious effort to be with people who will give us a good laugh. There's a load of science around having a good laugh. It's even been shown that if you introduce laugh therapy after a heart attack, that the participants are 40% less likely to get a subsequent heart attack. So having a good laugh matters. And you know yourself, if you've been out with friends and you've had a really good laugh, you feel better. And that's just not coincidental. That's because it's changed your circadian rhythm and circulating hormones in a beneficial way. So it is important. Now, of course, the people who struggle most with this, who experience lonely and social isolation, it's not like you can turn a tap on and you suddenly have a social network in the morning. So one of the things that I think we really need to focus on at a societal level is how we can regenerate communities in Ireland. We used to have great communities in Ireland, and they became lost, particularly during the Celtic Tiger. This is something that impacts all age groups, social isolation, loneliness, etc. And it is frankly toxic. Toxic physically, it accelerates death, and toxic mentally. It's associated significantly with dementia. So it's important for us to help others who find themselves socially isolated or lonely. And it doesn't matter about age. Everybody's experiencing this, particularly after COVID. When we looked at this in Tilda, we found that during the sweep of data collection we did during COVID, loneliness had increased 3-fold. And the sweep of collection we did after COVID, it was still double what it was before COVID. So it hasn't gone back to normal. It's impacted on people, and I think it's impacted on individuals' confidence to start reinvigorating friendships and social activities again. People changed during COVID, particularly with respect to social engagement. The close families are very important in all of these, in the blue zones, and often 3 generations are living in one house. Again, that's, of course, something we very much lost in our current civilization. And in that context, as one of the social scientists who went to Sardinia to explore the blue zones there, was interviewing an older man of 103, and she was sitting in his kitchen. And in the morning came down, they were sitting and all the rest, and she was getting ready to chat to him about trying to identify what was it about his life that had allowed him to be so well and healthy up to 103. This isn't an image of the man, this is one that I picked from the internet, obviously. And she didn't get a word in edgeways all day. She didn't get a chance to interview him. There were 3 generations living in the house, and every time somebody got up and came down, a grandchild or a daughter or a son or whatever, they were chatting to him and all that, having breakfast, and he had chat to them and all that. The house was located, the kitchen, on the street, okay? So everybody who passed, of course, came in. There was that sort of a community that we used to have in Ireland. We've lost it. The door was open. So visitors were coming in, and what she was amused at was he'd be all animated and chatting, etc. And one woman came in and she left, and he'd been all animated and chatting, and he said to the interviewer, "I can't stand that woman." But she was providing further variety to his day. Variety. The variety he had in social contacts during the day was remarkable. And it occurred to her, my God, that's his secret. You know, he hasn't a moment to grow old because there's so much happening around him. Variety. And we know that social relationships, for a long time, we've known that actually accelerate aging. And this is work that was done a few years ago, showing that the quality of your social relationships, not so much the frequency, but the quality, is as important on your health, for your health, as smoking, as alcohol, as physical activity and cholesterol. Isn't that remarkable? In terms of causing cardiovascular deaths. My husband loves this because he says, great, so as long as I'm with friends and I'm having a cigar and a glass of wine, I'm all right. Hard to refute. So the influence of social relationships on the risk for death are comparable with very well-established risk factors for mortality. And again, we know from the Irish longitudinal study that this very much pertains in Ireland, that volunteering, great way to participate socially, and social participation, looking after grandchildren, completely underestimated the contribution that older people make to society in Ireland in the context of grandchild care that they provide, enabling participation in our labour force market. People who participated in volunteering had a better quality of life in Ireland when adjusted for all other factors, less depression and less disability. So that's one solution. And I talked to you already about laughter. Laughter is a way of communicating. Purpose matters, and we can make purpose. You know, just because we're retired, it doesn't mean we lose purpose in life. Our work isn't necessarily our purpose. Your purpose, if you wake up in the morning and think, okay, today I'm going to shop, I'm going to walk to the shops, I'm going to clean those windows that have been looking at me filthy for the last year, whatever. You make your purpose in the morning and then stick with that. That's purpose like that is as good for us as anything else. In Okinawa, they actually have a special name for having a purpose, ikage. The Nicoyans call it plan de vida. Knowing why you wake up in the morning makes you healthier, happier, and adds another 7 years of extra healthy life. And gets these people being active well into the 80s and 90s. There's no reason why we shouldn't. Downtime is important. Now, stress, as I said earlier on, is part of life, but the blue zones have stress-relieving rituals. We looked at the Limolodans who were praying Adventists. The Icarians take a nap during the day. This is my favorite one. The Sardinians do happy hour with friends and a glass of wine regularly. It's a ritual. And that's problem sharing as well, because if you get to know the people you're meeting every day, you're going to share your issues and your problems. And there's a great neuroscience evidence to show that a problem shared is really a problem halved in terms of our circulating stress markers. Of course, the blue zones are well known for vegetarian diets predominantly. They do eat red meat and white meat and fish. But the big thing to remember is their diets are low in sugar, low in salt, and low in refined grains. And if we were to do nothing else today, if you want to change something in life, I would say do a little bit more exercise every week. Not less as you get older, more. Even a minute a week, or 5 minutes a week, not less. The mind saying that, oh, sure, I can't be expected to do that now. I'm such and such an age. It's not right. That's a falsehood. A little bit more physical activity, and just make that your first month. And the second one I would say is, and of course, ultra processed foods are high in sugar, salt, and refined grains. So knock out ultra processed foods, or at least every second day have nothing that's ultra processed. Vitamin D. Now, we've been banging on about vitamin D for a few years. 50% of people over 50 in Ireland in winter and spring months are deficient in vitamin D. And nearly every cell in the body has a vitamin D receptor. So it must have some function. And we know it's a significant function for falls and for muscle strength and fractures, okay? So, and then there's a lot of recent work suggesting it might improve our immune responses to things like COVID. So why would you be deficient when you don't need to be? Vitamin D supplements are as cheap as chips. And at least we should be on them in winter and spring months. And certainly people over 75 should be on a vitamin D supplement all of the time. How much? 800 to 1,000 units, not micrograms or milligrams, because they're the problem with vitamin D is it comes in many different measures and can confuse people. One newspaper once reported us on this and said 800 micrograms. I nearly had a heart attack because that's toxic. So remember, 800 to 1,000 units, international units, IU, that's what you ask for. And then don't finish everything on your plate. Don't fill a plate. All of the blue zones, what they have in common is they eat less. And there's a lot of talk now about fasting and calorie restriction. There was a controversial abstract presented at the Cardiac Society, the American Cardiac Society, very recently, which showed that fasting actually accelerated cardiovascular disease. But just to say, it was an observational study, and there's huge issues with respect to the methodology, and it was only an abstract, but it was grabbed by the media. The overwhelming evidence at the moment is for reducing the amount we eat and for calorie restriction. That means going for periods of time in the week when you're fasting. Either a 16-hour fast, you have your last meal at 6 o'clock in the evening, and you don't eat again until 16 hours the next day, and you use the night time to be part of your fast, or you fast until the evening 2 days a week. There's loads of different ones. You have to find the one that suits you. If you're inclined to faint, you can't have early morning fasting particularly. So you have to find the one that suits you, but definitely eat less. Put less on the plate than previously. Look, I'll just give you an example. These two monkeys were 20 when the photographs were taken, right? So they're both the same chronological age, same number of candles on their birthday cakes. Can't see them eating a birthday cake, mine, but anyway. And A and C, they're the same age. They don't look the same. Back to our men and the heterogeneity. They don't look the same. Would you say A or C is the one who's been on 20 years of calorie restriction? Hands up for A. And then the rest for C? Yeah, majority in the, just for those on Zoom are saying C. So let's look at C. He's got more fiery eyes. The nostrils are not as broad. The mouth isn't as drooped. Looks more hairy. And this one looks timid almost. Different eyes, nostrils big like that, and that's a feature of aging, and drooped mouth. Let's look at them from the side. That C was the calorie restricted monkey. Look at them from the side. This was A now. So look how much older they look when you see the whole body. Yeah, and frail compared to that one. That one looks like he's up for it. To be honest, these ones also got earlier heart disease, because monkeys get the same diseases as we do, and kidney disease, and arthritis, and weak muscles, frailty. So not only is this one looking more younger and energized, but it got diseases associated with aging later. And the more recent data on calorie restriction, if you can do it long term, is showing similar results for aging. But even if you start it now, when we look at biological aging, we can show differences in the rate of aging in cells by people who introduce caloric restriction. It's worth doing. And it is a way of getting the weight down. They're all just the different organs that it affects. And these are some medications you can take which may mimic what happens in the cells in caloric restriction. Resveratrol is very controversial. It acts on what's called sirtuin pathways. It's been widely promoted by a scientist called David Sinclair, and I think it's been pretty much thoroughly rubbish in the last couple of years. But I left it there because you may still come across it. Metformin is a well-known diabetic drug, which may have caloric restriction properties. And I know at the meeting I was at in Forest, there were kind of leaders in the field of aging there, 40 of us. And all of the Americans in that, almost all, but all the Americans I spoke to at the meeting were taking metformin, remarkably. There's a TAME trial ongoing, which is looking at its randomized control trial to see, does it extend lifespan? We'll have to wait for the results of that. There are side effects, so, you know, it's up to the individual. It's not on prescription. And the other ones that work probably for anti-aging, which are toxic, and you find them in different vegetables and fruit, are quercetin, quercetin. And this one, rapamycin, is probably proving the most interesting. It's given with patients who require chemotherapy. And the cell changes that people go through with cancer and chemotherapy are very similar to the inflammatory sort of processes that I talked to you earlier on about with respect to aging. So it may well be that this would prove a good candidate for slowing down the aging process. Hands up who does cold water swimming. Okay, hands up who takes a shower. Cold shower. Cold shower. Okay, and then cold water swimming, there were 3 or 4 hands up. Right, I do cold water swimming. There's a lot of good evidence for cold water swimming. Believe it or not, it's really good de-stressor, anti-inflammatory, relaxant. And look, the sea is only up the road. We're so lucky in Dublin. So think about it. But if not, at least take a cold shower in the morning. 10 seconds, 30 seconds. It's hard to do. I only started doing it about 5 or 6 years ago. And Gary, my husband, said when I started, he thought he'd have to get the house soundproofed. It was terribly difficult. Now I can't be without it. If I forget, and rarely would that happen, I think, what's wrong with me this morning? I didn't have my cold shower. It really invigorates it, so I recommend it. And there's a good science for it. Above all, you are as young as you feel. The conference I was at in Florence was on ageism and how pervasively negative ageism is. And how after a certain age, some people are made to feel invisible, are made to feel older. And again, Tilda has shown that if you experience ageism, if you have negative perceptions about your age, in other words, we ask, you know, your birth date, chronological age, how old do you feel? People who feel nearly their birth date actually have negative self-perceptions, and independent of everything else that might be influencing an outcome, are more likely to have physical and cognitive brain ill health. Cross-sectionally, when we just look at one way, and as predictors of the pace of aging, how fast they're aging. It's hard to fight against ageist language, ageist environments, if we are constantly being bombarded by negative statements with respect to aging. And it's out there, it's pervasive. 1 in 2 people have experienced significant ageism over the age of 65. They're the data. However, there's more of us. The demographic is changing in Ireland. We will soon have 1.3 million people over the age of 65. We currently have almost 700,000. That peer support and that volume, those numbers will give confidence to people as they get older. Because the more positive peer support you're surrounded by, the easier it is for you to feel younger. And there's lots of experiments done with young students in this. Students who were given positive stereotypes: accomplished, advice, alert, astute, creative, enlightened, guidance, improving, insightful, learned, sage. And those same biomarkers of inflammation and stress were measured before, when they were exposed to these words, and after they were exposed to the words and given a mental challenge. Their stress levels were significantly less after the mental challenge than the students, same age, who were given negative stereotypes before they got the mental stress test. Alzheimer's, confused, decline, decrepit, dementia, dependent, diseases, dying, forgets, incompetent, misplaces, senile. A nice experiment to show that even in young people, if you're fed negative perceptions, your stress responses, your inflammatory responses are negatively influenced when you're challenged with something. And every minute nearly, we get some sort of a little stress hit. So these are the things we can do for ourselves. And perceptions is really, really important with respect to all of those things. And thank you for the opportunity to share this. I have written a book to try and put this down. I only did this because just before COVID, we coupled with the GAA, and I did a tour of Ireland, which we didn't get finished, but we got through half of the counties with the GAA, a wonderful, wonderful organization. And they got together communities who weren't, not in academic institutions, in local hotels. And I was talking everything I've just shared with you now. And afterwards, so many people came up to me and said, have you written it down? There's so much there. We need to read more on that. So I broke my leg during COVID skiing, and I needed something to do. So I wrote down what I had done in the lectures. And I've just got so much fun out of it. I was saying to Susan since, and it's been translated into 12 languages. And little did I think that I'd have such a positive outcome from a bad practice. So we are in control of our aging process. It's never too late. And there are simple things we can all do that I hope you will take away and find of some value. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That really was incredible, the way you covered everything and explained everything so clearly. Any questions? Any online, maybe others?
Just to say, a cold room is better for you than a hot room.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately,
We should try to have a slightly lower temperature in the house. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
You might want to come over a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, if there's any questions. And yeah, so, I can think of one of the big issues is this issue of, the things that we can and we can't control.
Yeah.
So I guess, how much of this is down to the structural way we have our societies. What have you had an opportunity through Tilda to talk to policymakers about that kind of
100%. Very energized with this. Very energized with this at the moment. And I'm bothered by it, actually, because loneliness and social isolation is so pervasive. Our family sizes are so much smaller. Families are emigrating, traveling now. So, we have had an opportunity to talk to policymakers. It's important we raise awareness. At an individual level, I would say, don't be afraid to reach out, because in one study of young people in London, 89% were experiencing social isolation and loneliness. 89%, and they were social class 4 and 5. So working in offices, lawyers, companies, etc. So the likelihood is when you reach out to someone, they'll be delighted. That's the likelihood. So don't be afraid. You've nothing to lose. And if they're not delighted, well, you don't want to have dinner or a date with them anyway. So, you know, you lose nothing. So I'd say don't be afraid to reach out. And I would say also, you know, if you're feeling like that yourself, try and see who around you also is probably feeling like that. By giving, you actually get a lot. So by reaching out and giving to somebody else that you identify as being maybe lonely or socially isolated or whatever, you will get a lot from that personally, and a lot of the negativity that's associated with your own social isolation by just doing a kind act. So think through that. And then at a community level, I've had this idea. There's Goshka, which is an award to TY students, usually by President's Award for. Goshka is the Irish for an award, and it's an initiative to reward a good award. And I thought, why don't we have a Goshka more? So for people who have ideas in community, how to build community, how to enrich a community, and then just make that something almost like the tidy towns, and that the people would compete for, communities would compete for, come together with ideas. So maybe that's something we can do. I think raising awareness about it is terribly important, and letting people know that they're not alone, that this is really common and pervasive and becoming more so. Changing going forward, our infrastructures so that we have communal spaces and communal living spaces is terribly important. That is the new way. And even I have two young sons in London at the moment, and there are lots of opportunities for young people to actually live in communal spaces because they have been experiencing so much social isolation and loneliness. So new ways of thinking of building our macro environment, but it's complex and it's multifaceted.
There's some questions online. Lots of thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. You're a tonic, yes. Gin. And some, and there's some information there about.
Okay, at Healthy Wexford, we are trying to overcome the loneliness and isolation for all ages with our Happy to Chat initiative. Right, and there's a website there that you can visit for that. It's Wexford Community Sports Health. I don't know if there's a way of communicating that, but that would be brilliant. And there's a question here then, how long will it probably take to find out whether,
whether health impacting, whether basically ultra processed food.
Yeah, burnout. Yeah.
To halt the rise.
Oh no, they're already halting it. That's one of the things that I think is, and the other really interesting finding recently about this huge disparity, you know, the way Glasgow versus Kent, the life expectancy difference is over 20 years. Hope. One of the independent factors that communities in the more accelerated aging and death communities experience is a lack of hope. They see no outlet, no hope. And hope is tied quite closely to having a purpose. So, how long will it take for us to realize hope matters and to give communities hope, and ultra processed foods and health impacting issues? We're seeing it already. I think
that's a fantastic. I think you've given us a lot of hope. There's so much we can do for ourselves and for our community. So we might say thank you very much again.
Yes.
Thanks everyone. And then the usual tea and biscuits outside. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Bye, Jim.